My name is Nora Ellison. I'm 31, a financial analyst working in New Haven, and the family disappointment. At least according to everyone sitting at that dinner table. 2 years ago, I wasn't even invited to this annual Ellison family dinner. They called it an oversight. No apology. Just silence. And now, standing here tonight in the middle of their glittering dining room, I got something worse. You should be grateful we even invited you. That was my mother's toast. Glass raised. Smile sharp enough to draw blood. The room froze for a beat, forks halfway to mouths, before the others followed her lead, offering polite chuckles and carefully averted eyes. I smiled too. The kind of smile you practice in elevators and bathroom mirrors. The kind that doesn't reach your eyes. I dug my nails into the linen napkin on my lap and swallowed hard. It wasn't the first time she'd taken aim at me in public. It wouldn't be the last. The Ellison mansion hadn't changed. Candlelight bouncing off crystal glassware. An antique chandelier overhead. More rooms than people to fill them. But no space, ever, for me. I'd arrived 20 minutes late because of an emergency audit at the firm. I'd texted Eleanor, but she never replied. Timing wasn't just etiquette in this family, it was ammunition. And right on cue, she fired the next shot. You always find a reason to be late, don't you? Deadlines, meetings, anything to validate that job of yours. Work pays the bills, I said, keeping my tone level. Some of us don't have a trust fund to lean on. The air crackled for half a second. Lauren buttered her roll like nothing happened. Chase smirked into his glass. And then the conversation moved on. Without me, as usual. But it didn't end there. As the night dragged on, my mother's words got colder. More deliberate. Don't think you actually matter, she said later, just loud enough for everyone to hear. You chose your path. It's not aligned with this family's legacy, but we let you come. Isn't that enough? I placed my napkin on the table, pushed my chair back, and left. No one stopped me. No one called after me. What happened next? Let's just say, for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to belong. And I started keeping receipts. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever been the family afterthought, the one left off the guest list, hit that subscribe button. Because this story is about what happens when the person they tried to erase stops staying quiet. The table froze for a moment, forks hovering midair. Then, as if choreographed, the others chuckled politely and took sips from their glasses, pretending not to notice how the words sliced through the room like broken glass. I forced a smile, but my fingers dug into the linen napkin on my lap. It wasn't the first time I'd been the target. It wouldn't be the last. I glanced down the length of the grand table, flickering candlelight dancing off crystal glassware and silver cutlery. The Ellison mansion never changed. Too big, too cold, too desperate to impress. 2 years ago, I hadn't even made the guest list for this dinner. They said it was an oversight. No one apologized. And here I was now, being told I should feel honored just to breathe the same air. I'd arrived 20 minutes late. I'd texted Eleanor, but she never responded. The firm had an emergency audit, and I couldn't leave my team hanging. But in this house, punctuality wasn't just etiquette, it was ammunition. You always find a reason to be late, don't you? Eleanor said, eyes glittering as she sipped her wine. Deadlines, meetings, always something to validate that job of yours. Work pays the bills, I replied evenly, avoiding her gaze. I wouldn't let her see the heat behind my eyes. Some of us don't have a trust fund to lean on. That silenced the room for a beat. Lauren blinked, then busied herself buttering a roll. Harold pretended to be deeply interested in his steak. Chase smirked into his glass. He always enjoyed watching Eleanor cut me down. It was sport to him. So dramatic, Eleanor said with a sigh. We're just being polite, letting you join. No need to turn this into a courtroom. I didn't know civility had to be earned by blood, I muttered. The meal carried on, technically. Conversations bloomed and swirled, but always around me. I'd try to chime in about Chase's recent promotion or Lauren's house remodel, but they'd nod absently and resume their dialogue as if I hadn't spoken. Every comment I made died before it landed. The waiter refilled my wine. I didn't drink it. Don't think you actually matter, Eleanor said later, not even bothering to lower her voice. You chose your path, and it's certainly not aligned with this family's legacy, but we let you come. Isn't that enough? I looked up. She wasn't smirking anymore. She was watching me, studying how far she could push before I broke. I swallowed, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because nothing I said would matter here. Not to her, not to any of them. I placed my napkin carefully on my plate and pushed my chair back. Excuse me, I said. Nobody moved. Nobody asked where I was going. No one even looked up. I walked slowly through the dining room, past the paintings of old men I was apparently meant to admire, past the hall where Eleanor once threw a vase at my head, past the warmth that had never reached me. The evening air hit my skin like a shock, crisp, dry, empty. I didn't rush. I wanted to feel every step away from them. Each footfall was a release. As I reached the iron gate and clicked it shut behind me, my phone buzzed. Brittany, you okay? That was brutal. Do they still think Lauren's tuition paid itself? I sat cross-legged on my couch, phone cradled between my shoulder and cheek, eyes scanning the dim apartment around me. The city lights outside flickered like a weak pulse. Brittany's voice crackled through the speaker, but her sarcasm landed sharp and clean, even through the static. They're delusional, I murmured. She never got that full scholarship they brag about. I wired every last payment myself. 72 grand over 4 years. Gone. And they still parade her around like she's some self-made golden child, Brittany said. It's rich. I let out a breathless laugh. The kind that comes when you're too tired to cry. I pushed off the couch, bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. The room was small, a one-bedroom I rented above a bakery, but it was mine. No marble, no chandeliers, no butlers. Just burnt coffee smells and the sound of traffic humming through the windows. I opened the hall closet and pulled out the plastic file bin. It was old, from my college days. Labeled tabs curled with age, bills, receipts, student loans, taxes. I hadn't touched this box in years. They never thanked you, did they? Brittany asked. Nope. Just told people she earned every bit of it. I tugged out a folder labeled Lauren Yale and flipped through the printed bank statements. Tuition checks, deposits, transfers. I remembered sitting in my dorm room at midnight, transferring money I couldn't afford, lying to my landlord just to make the next payment. I bet they burned every receipt, Brittany muttered. Well, I said, holding up one of the old confirmation pages, I didn't. A silence settled between us. Not awkward, just heavy. What did Eleanor say when you brought it up? She finally asked. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hand trembled as I lifted it. She said, "We don't owe you anything." And then she turned away like I was the one who'd asked for a handout. I didn't know why I'd kept all this. Maybe some part of me always knew. Maybe I thought the truth would matter someday. I carried the folder to my desk and sat down. As I flipped through the files, an envelope slipped free. Thin, yellowed, and unmarked. I opened it. Inside was a printed document. Last Will and Testament, draft 2017. My father's name sat at the top in bold letters. I skimmed the lines quickly. Chase, primary inheritor of business assets. Lauren. Trust fund adjusted for educational pursuits. My name didn't appear until the last page. To Nora Ellison, I leave. My sincerest wishes for success in her independent endeavors. I read it twice, then a third time. Independent endeavors. It felt like being written out of existence. Elegantly, legally, permanently. I wasn't even worth $1. I was never in it, I whispered. What? Brittany said. I looked at the signature, notarized, stamped, witnessed. This was 5 years ago, I said. They never planned to include me, not even once. Brittany's voice dropped low. You want help digging, don't you? They thought I'd disappear if they stopped talking about me. I didn't. I opened a cafe instead. Brittany slid the cappuccino across the counter with practiced ease, the foam shaped into a delicate heart. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic and took in the space around us. Third place smelled of roasted beans and lavender soap. The windows were open, letting in the crisp November air, and the soft murmur of conversation mixed with the hiss of the espresso machine. It was quiet here, in that sacred, deliberate way. Like every sound mattered. You know, Brittany said, leaning against the back counter, your mother once offered to invest in this place. I raised an eyebrow. Eleanor? Philanthropist of caffeine? She said she'd consider it, if I renamed it after her and let her approve the menu. Brittany smirked. She suggested Eleanor's Emporium. I said no. She called my parents, told them I was mentally unstable. I stared at her. She did, Brittany said, laughing. Called it a concerned family intervention. Classic Eleanor. If she can't control it, she'll burn it down. I sipped my drink, letting the warmth anchor me. Sounds familiar. Brittany reached below the counter and pulled out a thick manila folder. She placed it between us. I've been waiting to show you this. Inside were photocopies of property agreements, business loans, permits, and a name on every line that made my pulse skip. Nora Ellison, I read aloud. Sponsor? She nodded. You co-signed. Not in real time, but your name was listed on the collateral from an old education fund your father had set up when you were a minor. I found it in the small print. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. I never saw these. They were buried. Your mom tried to revoke the fund, but the paperwork had already gone through the first approval. They never told you. I blinked, stunned. So, part of this place was funded through my account? Technically, but more importantly, Brittany said, leaning closer. They've tried to erase you from everything that's not under their thumb. The family fund, the estate, even your own narrative. This, she gestured around the cafe, is one of the few things they couldn't bury. A wave of emotions rose inside me. Confusion, anger, a strange twinge of pride. I'd felt so powerless for so long. But this? This was proof I still existed in places they couldn't see. Brittany added, You're not just being excluded from the table. You're being removed from everything they don't control. Her voice was calm, but the words cut through me. I thought back to the dinner, to Eleanor's wineglass smile, to the way Chase looked past me like I was a smudge on the tablecloth. I had walked out, yes, but they still thought I was gone. Defeated. That I'd keep fading if they never mentioned my name again. I stood up slowly, the folder pressed against my chest like armor. Outside, a bus rumbled past, and the bells on the cafe door chimed as a couple walked in, laughter trailing behind them. No more erasing me, I said softly. Brittany tilted her head. You thinking what I think you're thinking? I looked at her, steady. It's time I took my name back. They never imagined I kept copies. Of everything. The key turned with a reluctant click, louder than I remembered. The door creaked open. releasing a stale waft of dust and old ambition. The Ellison Asset Management Office had been shuttered since Dad claimed it no longer served the family's strategy. But I'd kept the key, just in case. The office felt frozen in time. The same leather chairs, the same crooked painting of some 19th century magnate whose name we'd all pretended to know. I stepped inside, brushing my fingers along the edge of the reception desk. The answering machine light blinked with ghost messages from years ago. The silence buzzed. I walked past the old glass wall into what had been Harold's private room, my father's kingdom. Oak desk, steel file drawers, a dusty Rolodex still labeled VIP. I knelt by the bottom drawer, pulling it open. Receipts, annual reports, ledger copies, and beneath it, a folder, thin and inconspicuous, wedged under the drawer rail. I slipped it out, sat back on the floor, and opened it. The first page was a letter, typed, cold, to Daniel Mercer, attorney at law from Harold Ellison, Re. Proposed adjustments, will and beneficiary structure date, August 2019. I read it once, then again. The words sank like pebbles in water, each heavier than the last. We must consider removing Nora Ellison as primary successor. Given her continued divergence from family expectations and her resistance to guidance, she no longer reflects the estate's long-term interests. I swallowed hard. Attached were scanned drafts of amendments, unsigned but clearly prepped. Then, near the end, I found it. A finalized transfer of ownership form for a secondary property in Vermont. A modest estate we'd inherited from my mother's great-aunt. A place I once loved as a child. I was listed as co-owner on every document I remembered. Except this one. This document read, Nora Ellison hereby forfeits all claim and interest to the asset known as Cherryvale Farm, Vermont, including but not limited to physical property, mineral rights, and financial yields. But I never signed it. My signature was there, fluid, confident, and utterly fake. I blinked. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. Brittany's number was still open from the night before, but I hesitated. I needed more. I called someone else. Marla? I said when the line picked up. It's Nora Ellison. You used to work with my family. As archivist, I think. A pause. Yes. I remember you, sweetheart. Your mother used to say you asked too many questions. I smiled bitterly. I still do. The conversation was short. Marla no longer worked in finance, but she still had records. Her habit, she said. She was always a quiet rebel behind the filing cabinet. She agreed to meet the next morning. I stayed another hour, checked the logbooks, scanned what I could. Every paper that touched my name, every letter, every signature. As I moved toward the exit, the night security guard passed by. He gave me a half nod, not quite sure if I belonged. I gave him a half smile, not quite sure either. Back in the car, I unfolded the forged contract again. One line stared back at me, stark and irrevocable. Nora Ellison has forfeited claim to... I folded the page slowly. No, I hadn't. But now I would claim something much bigger. I didn't scream. I froze. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the screen, daring me to hit send. The email was short. 10 lines, maybe less. But it was the most deliberate thing I'd written in years. I reread it once more, then clicked send. The confirmation appeared instantly. Request received. Review in progress. I sat back in the chair, hands cold despite the warm glow of my laptop. Outside, the streetlights reflected off the rain-slick pavement below my apartment. Downtown New Haven never slept, but tonight, I needed its noise. I needed to feel the world hum on, even as mine shifted in silence. It had taken 2 days to gather the documentation, the legal guardianship clause tied to my trust, the clause Harold had added when I turned 21. Just in case, he'd said back then. What he didn't know was that it gave me partial control of a shared family account. An account that Eleanor still used like her private ATM. The account had been scheduled to cover Harold's 72nd birthday dinner. A lavish ordeal. 14 guests, a private dining room at Maialino's, and a wine-pairing menu so steep it made my fingers curl. The bank froze the transaction at 3:08 p.m. I didn't scream. I froze. Coldness, Eleanor once said, is a quality needed to survive in this family. Fine. I'd stopped feeling heat years ago. A ping broke the silence. Brittany. Did you just cut off their dinner fund? I grinned. Was it that obvious? Brittany. Eleanor's losing it. I mean, she just called the restaurant, screaming. They told her the card was declined twice. I exhaled slowly. The weight didn't lift. Not yet. But it shifted. For once, I had moved the needle. Now they know something shifted, I typed. But not what. I stared at the words before hitting send. Brittany's 3 dots appeared almost instantly, then vanished. I closed the laptop and stood, the adrenaline simmering under my skin. I wasn't looking for applause. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was leverage. A silent signal that I was no longer dormant, no longer the quiet one. The phone rang. Not Brittany. Not a number I didn't recognize. Just Eleanor. I let it buzz once, twice, then answered, placing the phone to my ear without a word. Her voice came low, clipped, and almost calm. We need to talk. Now. She asked me to meet at the country house. Neutral ground, she said. Nothing about Eleanor is neutral. The tires crunched over the gravel driveway like bones being ground to dust. The Vermont air was colder than I remembered, sharp with the scent of pine and decay. The family estate loomed ahead, 3 stories of whitewashed brick and silence, with windows like eyes too tired to close. I hadn't been here in nearly 7 years. As I stepped out of the car, a breeze tugged at my coat, sending a chill down my spine. Leaves clung to the gutters. The porch creaked as I walked up, a rusted bell above the door long since stopped ringing. The place felt like a ghost of every lie we told ourselves as a family. Eleanor opened the door before I could knock. Nora, she said with a faint smile. Right on time. She was wearing cream wool and pearls, the uniform of someone who had curated her dignity. Her eyes didn't reveal anything, but her jaw was tight. Inside, the house hadn't changed. Same plaid furniture, same dusty chandelier. She led me to the old sitting room where we used to play board games under the guise of family bonding. Now, the fire was unlit, the room freezing. Tea? She offered. I'm fine, I said. She poured herself a cup anyway, lifting it with the same elegance she wielded at dinner parties, the kind that could slice a room in half. I waited for her to begin. I suppose you think you've made some sort of point, she said after a pause. I haven't even started. She sipped, unbothered. The bank account, Harold's dinner, those things can be corrected. This isn't about dinner, Eleanor, and you know it. She tilted her head. Don't pretend to understand the complexities of what we manage. You opted out, remember? No, I said, voice steady. You removed me. A flicker. Not quite a wince, but close. She set her cup down. I have documents, I continued. The original deed to Cherryvale, with my name. The transfer was forged. I never signed it. You're mistaken. I'm not. Silence stretched between us, pulled taut by years of rehearsed civility. She finally stood and walked to the window, staring out at the overgrown lawn. Do you know how many pieces are on this board, Nora? How many people rely on this family staying intact? I stood too. A family doesn't stay intact by erasing its members. She turned, eyes sharper now. Sometimes sacrifices are made? No, I said. Sometimes thieves get caught. Her smile returned, thinner now. You sound just like your grandfather, always so dramatic. I sound like someone who knows what she owns. I moved to leave. There was nothing else to discuss. Not here. She followed me to the door, her heels silent on the old wood floor. As I stepped outside and reached for my car door, she stopped me. "Don't do this, darling," she said softly. "You don't know how many people you'll bring down." I met her gaze. That's exactly the point. He hadn't returned my calls in 3 years, until I used the word audit. The diner sat off a quiet road in Bridgeport, tucked between a bait shop and a boarded-up laundromat. I'd passed it 100 times before, but never stopped. Always too busy, too purposeful. Today, I was here with one purpose only. Inside, the air smelled like burnt coffee and fried butter. A Christmas garland sagged above the window despite being February. I spotted Bernard Tilley in the back booth, exactly where he said he'd be. He looked smaller than I remembered. Shoulders hunched, thinning hair slicked back with care that didn't match his faded corduroy blazer. His hands were wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug like it was keeping him tethered to this world. "Mr. Tilley," I said quietly. He looked up. His eyes flickered with recognition and reluctance. "Nora," he said, voice scratchy. "You look like your mother." I slid into the booth across from him. "That's a hell of a way to start a meeting." He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. A waitress approached with a notepad. "Coffee?" she asked. I nodded. Bernard kept his eyes on me. "I wasn't sure you'd show," I said. "You said audit," he replied. "That word comes with consequences." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, slid it across the table. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside were 2 pages. One, a copy of an old email between Bernard and my father. The other, a photograph I'd taken of a document from the asset office, bearing Bernard's signature. Under it, forged authorization lines, one of them mine. He stared at the paper. "You've been digging." "Just starting," I said. "But I figured you'd want your name kept clean." He let out a breath. "You always were the sharp one. Quiet, but sharp. You still haven't told me what I need to know." The waitress returned with my coffee. Neither of us touched it. "I was asked to make adjustments," he began, slow and careful. "Nothing overt. Just reclassify a few asset transfers. Shift some percentages. Standard tax mitigation, they called it." "Who asked you?" "Your father," he said, "but the final sign-off always came from Eleanor." My stomach twisted. I had expected this, but hearing it aloud cracked something colder open inside me. "Why didn't you report it?" "Because I wanted to stay alive," he said plainly, "and employed." He reached into the seat beside him and pulled out a folder, not thick, but dense with weight that had nothing to do with paper. "I've been keeping this," he said. "Call it insurance. I don't want to die with secrets." I opened it slowly. Inside, a notarized document. A power of attorney, filed and signed 2 years ago. The name across the top made my blood still. Nora Ellison. Bernard tapped the corner of the page. They set it up right after she graduated with that fake scholarship. Quietly moved certain assets under her management. Publicly, she's a figurehead. Privately, she holds the keys. I stared at the signature. Lauren's, unmistakable. Or another forgery? "She's being groomed," I muttered. Bernard nodded. "Not groomed, positioned. You were the backup. Now you're the liability." I closed the folder. "They think I'll go quietly." He looked at me for a long moment. "Will you?" I stood, folding the documents back into my bag. "No," I said. "They should have known better. They buried me with lies. I'll dig them up with truth." The recording studio was nothing more than a modified spare room in Brittany's apartment. Sound panels stapled to the walls, mismatched chairs pushed close together, and a glowing live indicator taped under the webcam. But as I sat across from her, watching the red circle blink on, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff with the entire world listening for my next step. "We're live in 5, Brittany whispered, adjusting her mic. "You ready?" I nodded. My pulse thudded in my ears. This wasn't just a conversation, it was exposure. "Welcome back to Third Place Talks," Brittany began, her voice smooth and steady. "Today's topic, when family turns toxic. Our guest? She knows that better than most." She turned to me. "Say hello, Nora." I leaned in. "Hi." "And you're not just here as a guest," Brittany continued. "You've got something to share. Something that's been hidden." We started slow, surface-level chatter about boundaries, power, inheritance. It felt like stretching before a sprint, but the energy shifted the moment she asked, "What happens when your name is signed on something, and you never held the pen?" That was my cue. I reached into the folder on the table and pulled out the document, Bernard's file, the forged transfer contract. I held it up to the camera. "This," I said, "is a contract stating that I, Nora Ellison, voluntarily forfeited ownership of a family property. Problem is, I didn't." Brittany's eyebrows lifted just enough to signal I should keep going. "My signature's on it," I continued, "but I never signed. I didn't know it existed until 2 weeks ago. It was hidden in an office I used to intern in, an office my father once ran." The chat on the live stream began to buzz. Brittany glanced at her screen. "Do you know who submitted it?" "Final authorization came from my mother," I said, letting the words hang. "But the draft was printed from my sister's laptop. That's what the metadata says." Brittany inhaled slowly. "And how long has this been going on?" "Years, maybe longer. The goal wasn't just to take things. It was to erase me, first from family events, then from business, finally from the will." The chat was exploding. Brittany turned her screen slightly so I could see. Viewers were clipping quotes, sharing screenshots, tagging news outlets. I leaned toward the mic again. "My name was forged, my presence erased, but I'm still here, and I remember everything." Brittany didn't even blink. She just said, "You heard her, folks." By the time we ended the episode, the word Ellison was trending nationwide. I was packing up my notes when Brittany's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Her eyes narrowed. "Email from their lawyer," she said, passing it to me. "Subject line, cease and desist. Now." It wasn't a courtroom, but the silence before I walked in, it might as well have been. The marble floor of the investment bank's conference hall echoed with every step I took. Tall windows let in a thin drizzle of gray light, and the heavy chandelier above rattled slightly in the draft. This wasn't the grand courtroom setting most people imagined when you said public reckoning, but it might as well have been. Every pair of eyes in the room followed me as I walked toward the long, oval table. Eleanor was already seated, her posture a sculpture of composure. Harold sat next to her, face unreadable, fingers tapping lightly against the leather folder in front of him. Lauren flanked them, eyes downcast but jaw tense. Across the table sat the 7 trustees, most of them old, all of them men, their expressions carved from finance and caution. Grace gave me a single nod as I took my seat. Brittany stood near the back, notepad in hand, her phone clipped to a tiny tripod. Recording. Watching. The chairman cleared his throat. "We've convened this meeting to address recent concerns raised regarding asset misallocation, trustee authority, and allegations of forgery." Eleanor's smile was polite and calculated. "I'd like to open by stating that my daughter has recently experienced a difficult period. Her accusations stem from emotional instability, not fact." I didn't flinch. My absence from this family's narrative, I said evenly, has been years in the making. Emotional or not, the numbers don't lie. Grace connected her laptop to the projector. The first slide lit the room. A scanned document. My signature, large and looping, stamped onto a land. That's a legal breach of the Foundation Charter, which requires a trustee to be 18 and unaffiliated. Did you even know that? Lauren's mouth opened, then closed. A ripple of motion. One board member leaned toward another. Someone coughed. The tension was no longer ambient. It had landed. Eleanor began to speak, but the chairman raised a hand. Enough, he said quietly. We need time to review all of this. And I believe a forensic audit may be in order. His words weren't loud, but they rang out like a bell. Another trustee, barely above a whisper, muttered, "We need a vote." The numbers didn't lie. They screamed. There's something eerie about an office built for truth. The auditor's conference room in Manhattan was blindingly white. Whiteboards along every wall, covered in marker-streaked equations and diagrams. A laptop projected a screen split in four. Spreadsheets, account histories, digital signatures, and, in the final quadrant, Eleanor's face, tight-lipped, pixelated, and silent for now. The room buzzed with the muted energy of high-stakes arithmetic. Brittany sat behind me, quiet but recording, her eyes wide as the numbers rolled out. The lead auditor, a woman named Cynthia Marks, clicked her pen once, then again, then pushed her glasses higher on the bridge of her nose. We completed the first round of cross-verification this morning, she began, her voice clipped. 3 separate funds were diverted, quietly, over the last 6 years. 2 of them ended in what we believe are shell companies registered offshore. The third? She tapped her screen. Used to purchase this property. A real estate listing appeared. Ocean view, cedar roof, salt-swept driveway. In Nora Ellison's name, purchased in cash. I didn't flinch. I'd expected worse. But the sharp inhale from Brittany behind me said enough. Cynthia continued. The purchase was made using a proxy company directed by Nora Ellison. The signature used matches other financial authorizations from Mr. Harold Ellison. The camera zoomed slightly into Harold, who was seated beside Eleanor in their own dial-in location. His tie was slightly askew, his eyes red-rimmed. The man looked smaller somehow. I didn't know, he said quietly. She said we needed to move some things for tax reasons. I never read the full doc. You signed off on a $250,000 transfer, Cynthia replied, neutral but firm. From a trust intended for Nora Ellison's Education Foundation. Silence. The kind that builds inside the gut, not the ear. On the screen, Eleanor shifted. Her lips moved before her microphone unmuted, catching only the tail of her breath. Ridiculous, she snapped. This has gone far enough. You're all being manipulated by a bitter child with a vendetta and a microphone. She leaned in. You think this makes you strong, Nora? Dragging your family through the mud? You're nothing. You've always been nothing. I let her words fall. Let them hang in the air, thick and bitter like old perfume. Then I looked straight into the camera. If I'm nothing, I said, calm and deadly, why did you go through so much trouble to steal everything that was mine? No one moved. Not Brittany, not Harold, not even the auditor who only clicked her pen one more time. From behind me, a quiet ding. An email. Cynthia glanced at her laptop and nodded. That's from the board, she announced. Effective immediately, Nora Ellison is suspended from all positions of trust and authority related to the Ellison Family Foundation, pending further investigation and possible legal action. On the screen, Eleanor stood up. The frame caught the hem of her silk blouse, the blur of movement, the sharp click of her heels. Then, darkness. She had ended the call. I exhaled. My lungs ached from the restraint. Behind me, Brittany muttered, "You just shattered a dynasty." I turned to her, pulse still steady, voice like a fuse. "Start rolling everything. It's time the world saw what legacy really looks like." Some people lose money. Eleanor lost her audience. The grand chandelier above the gala floor shimmered like it always had, suspended in crystal silence, hanging over designer gowns and rented tuxedos, over generations of whispered alliances. But that night, it didn't gleam for Eleanor Ellison. She arrived just after 7, wrapped in deep navy satin and practiced poise. Her heels clicked in rhythm across the marble foyer of the Sutton Civic Hall, a venue she'd once called Tout Nouveau. Now it was the only one that hadn't rescinded her invitation. Lauren followed close behind, her dress slightly wrinkled, her eyes flicking nervously across the room. Their entrance, once anticipated, barely turned heads. No one came to greet them. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, lips drawn into the curve of a smile too polished to be sincere. She scanned the room for someone, anyone, who might pretend the scandal hadn't landed. But sponsors averted their gaze, the gala organizers shifted awkwardly behind the floral displays, and even the valet pretended to check his clipboard. Brittany was already there, camera in hand. Not hiding. Not this time. She stood by the media row, filming the crowd, the awkward silences, the body language that said more than words ever could. "Mrs. Ellison," a voice called out. It was a reporter, young and unnervingly calm, pressing forward with a polite firmness. "What do you say to those who claim your daughter's accusations involve the misuse of inherited funds?" The spotlight hit her like a slap. Eleanor's fingers twitched over her clutch. "I say," she began carefully, "that families go through complicated things, and no amount of dramatics should be taken as gospel." Click. Flash. Record. She tried to laugh, lightly, just enough to pass for composure, but the sound fell flat in the air. Then the doors opened again, and I stepped in. I wasn't wearing diamonds. My dress was simple, dark velvet with sleeves to the wrist, but the silence that followed my entrance wasn't about what I wore. It was about the fact that I was there, and that no one had expected me to be. The same sponsor who used to praise Eleanor's leadership turned and spotted me. Her face lit up, and she crossed the floor, arms outstretched. "Nora," she said, pulling me into an embrace that flashed in every camera. "I've been waiting to see you." Brittany filmed it all. Every glance, every nod, every quiet shifting of alliances. Across the room, Eleanor stood frozen. Lauren moved to follow, but her mother's fingers clamped around her wrist. "Don't," Eleanor hissed. But Lauren didn't look at her. A moment later, they both turned for the exit. The queen, without a court. Her heir, a ghost in silk. Near the doorway, someone must have whispered something, because the crowd parted just enough to let them through, but not without watching. Eleanor paused, just a second, and gave the room a mechanical bow. The kind you offer not out of gratitude, but out of defeat. She reached for Lauren's hand again, and this time, Lauren pulled it back. The moment was quick, but it was unmistakable. I watched them go, my expression unreadable, but inside, something shifted. Not victory, not yet. Something closer to balance. Outside, in the glow of the valet lights, a voice cracked. "You told me she abandoned us," Lauren whispered. Her hand was shaking now. "But you erased her." The door shut behind them, and for the first time in years, the ballroom didn't belong to Eleanor Ellison. It belonged to the ones who were never meant to return. I wasn't trying to rebuild bridges, but some people were swimming toward me anyway. The afternoon sunlight pooled across the corkboard walls of my office, catching on the pinned-up sketches, flowcharts, and half-drawn lesson plans written in 5 different colors of ink. The space buzzed with quiet energy, A pair of interns huddled over a laptop. Someone laughed in the hallway, and Brittany, perched cross-legged on the corner of my desk, adjusted a camera lens and muttered about lighting. I had just reviewed a grant proposal for a district in rural Vermont when Grace knocked once and opened the door. "She's here." I didn't need to ask who. Lauren stood outside the glass wall, her posture stiff, eyes shifting between the floor and the ceiling, as if she hadn't decided whether to run or breathe. I nodded once. She stepped in slowly, fingers wrapped tight around the strap of her bag. "No cameras," she said. Brittany didn't flinch. "Don't worry, I'm just here to focus pull." Lauren didn't smile. She didn't need to. I gestured toward a chair. "Sit." She did. For a long minute, we didn't speak. Just the hum of an espresso machine somewhere in the kitchen and the clatter of keys. "You probably hate me," Lauren began. "I don't have the energy to," I said. "But I'm not here to make this easy." "I know." I looked at her carefully. The way her lipstick was too precisely applied, the way her jacket didn't quite fit her shoulders. Someone else had picked that outfit. Someone who didn't know her very well. "You get one truth," I said softly. "Use it well." Lauren inhaled sharply. "I think she used me. I think she used all of us. She told me you abandoned us, that you were selfish, unstable, and cruel. But every time I asked about the money, she changed the subject." I said nothing. "I checked the records," Lauren continued. "Not the fake ones. I found a backup." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small black USB drive. She didn't hand it to me immediately. "You don't owe me anything," she added. "But I needed to hand this to you myself." Then she placed it on my desk and slid it across the polished surface. "It's not everything, but it's more than enough to start." Brittany's voice floated across the room, low and breathless. "You realize, this could take them down completely." Lauren blinked. "I didn't do it to take them down." I picked up the USB and met her eyes. "But you didn't stop it either." A long silence followed. Then she stood up. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," she said. "But I'd like to know who my sister actually is, not who I was told she was." I let her leave without answering. Brittany waited until the door closed behind her before speaking again. "She's swimming back," she said. "I noticed." Then she spun the laptop toward me. The screen showed a trailer she'd finished cutting less than an hour ago. "The Iris They Tried to Erase." The title flashed across the screen. Grainy footage of Eleanor's confrontation, then a quiet shot of me walking into the trustee meeting. A voiceover. "My name was forged. My legacy stolen. But I didn't disappear. I rebuilt." I watched the clip in silence. "You really want to release this?" I asked. Brittany grinned. "You kidding? After what Lauren just gave you?" I glanced down at the USB drive in my hand. Then I looked at her and said what I hadn't said out loud yet. What I'd been circling for months. We could go after everything. Not just justice. Everything. Her smile grew wider. "And you finally mean it?" "In the end, they kept the house. I kept the truth." The red circle on the stage looked smaller than I'd imagined. From backstage, it had seemed like a spotlight. Something to fear. Something to avoid. But now, standing on it, I realized it was only fabric. A propriedad. Just like so much of the world I used to belong to. The lights weren't blinding. The audience wasn't massive. It was a local TEDx event held in a repurposed college auditorium. Seats half filled with students, teachers, and quiet strangers. No velvet ropes, no champagne, no curated applause. And yet, I felt more seen than I ever had at any Ellison gala. I looked toward the back row. Brittany had a handheld camera on her lap, not raised, just present. Lauren sat beside her, hands folded, shoulders still. She hadn't said anything since we arrived, but she was here. That mattered. I adjusted the microphone. When I was 17, I began. My mother told me I was nothing. A few heads turned. The silence settled in. She didn't scream it. She didn't throw anything. She just looked at me over a dinner table and said, "Some people are born to matter. Others are born to keep the table set." And then she moved on, like she hadn't just carved it into my bones. I exhaled slowly. I didn't fight back that night. I spent years trying to become something she'd approve of, someone worthy of being counted. But no matter what I did, degrees, jobs, awards, I stayed erased. The screen behind me displayed no slides, just a slow fade of light, the kind used to mimic dawn. I learned something in the erasure. When someone spends years trying to delete you from the narrative, it's not because you're unimportant, it's because you terrify them. A faint murmur rippled through the room. I was told I didn't matter, so I stopped asking for their seat at the table. I built my own. No applause, just stillness, reflection. I didn't win everything. I didn't get the house. I didn't reclaim the legacy, the name, the illusion. They kept those. But I got my truth. I got the proof. And more importantly, I got out. I smiled gently, as if to myself, and I'm still here. The lights faded to soft crimson. One spotlight lingered. A single clap began, then another. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. Backstage, my phone vibrated. I stepped aside and checked it. A message from an unknown number. "Would you be open to turning this into a book?" I looked back at the stage, at the circle, at the rows of eyes, some wet, some bright, some cautious. Then I turned toward Brittany, who was watching me like someone who already knew my answer. Maybe it wasn't about reclaiming the family name. Maybe it was about helping others reclaim their own. They thought erasing me would be easy, quiet, permanent. Like deleting a line from a will or removing a name from a guest list. And for a while, I believed them. I believed that silence was safety, that being quiet would keep the peace. But peace, in that house, was a performance, tightly choreographed and brutally rehearsed. Every smile had a sharp edge. Every word was measured, especially the ones meant to cut. I know, because they used them on me. And when that wasn't enough, they signed my name to documents I never saw, moved money I never touched, and told a story where I never mattered. But I was there. I kept the receipts, literal and otherwise. The tuition payments, the fake signatures, the forged transfers, the words they whispered behind closed doors. I collected them, quietly. Because while they tried to write me out, I learned to write everything down. There was never a dramatic explosion, just a freeze, one account at a time, one lie exposed at a time, until the truth had nowhere left to hide. I never screamed. I calculated. And when the podcast aired, when the public heard my story, not their version of it, the shift was seismic. No one could unsee it. Not the board members, not the investors, not the cousins who used to call me the invisible one, especially not Eleanor. Her voice cracked during the audit call. Not from guilt, she doesn't have that, but from the sound of control slipping. For someone who built her world on image and intimidation, being questioned was worse than being caught. And Lauren. She looked at me differently after that night at the gala. She didn't say much, just handed me a USB, a quiet apology wrapped in evidence. Sometimes that's all healing gets. Not a hug, not a speech, but a shift in the way someone finally sees you. I didn't want revenge. Not really. I wanted recognition. I wanted the truth to stand taller than the lies, even if it stood alone. Now, they keep the house. The nameplate still says Ellison. The furniture hasn't moved. But I kept something else. The truth. my voice, and the dignity they spent years trying to strip away. The documentary Brittany made isn't flashy. It doesn't dramatize what happened. It just shows the math, the emails, the silences that were too loud to ignore. And it shows me, not the angry daughter, not the dramatic heiress, but someone who fought quietly, then publicly, because no one else would. Today, I speak at schools, not to talk about family or lawsuits, but to tell kids, especially the quiet ones, that being unseen is not the same as being unworthy. That silence, when chosen, is strength, but when forced, it becomes erasure. What happened to me could happen to anyone born into a legacy they didn't design but were expected to protect. And maybe that's the point. Because when injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. Like shadows retreating at sunrise, no dynasty built on silence can survive the light of truth. If you've ever been made to feel small, like your worth was tied to what you could provide, or like your absence would go unnoticed until you stopped giving, then this story was for you. If it resonated, hit that like button, leave a comment sharing your own experience with family erasure, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your voice, your boundaries, and your place at the table. Thanks for listening to my journey. And remember, you matter, even when they pretend you don't.